Hello and welcome to today's Rocksmith developer stream. I am your host, Douglas Lilly. I'm also the community developer on Rocksmith. So very glad to have you here with us today. As usual, we're going to listen to some music. We're going to talk about music. We're going to have some raffles. All that's coming up. Our musical guest today from the community, BBQKyle. That's BBQKyle. He is a Twitch streamer, which you can find him here, but he'll be shown a little bit later. Right now, I would love to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Margaret Jones returns. Welcome, Marge.
Hello. How's it going?
Great today. It's a bit less orange out today in the Bay Area.
The sky's not on fire anymore.
Yellow, but yeah, it's there's not this weird umbral cast over everything in sight. Marge, today you're here to talk. This is a bit of I guess a music appreciation stream.
Yeah.
Or at least music, if not appreciation, at least vocabulary knowledge. We are going to talk about genres and their role in music and how they affect music and how the music relates to that. We're going to go into all that information. But first, let's talk a little bit about you. So this is your second time on the stream with us. And you are, as mentioned, Dr. Margaret Jones indicates, and that's not just a nickname. You are a doctor. Tell us a little bit about your doctorate.
So I have a PhD in music. I studied music history at UC Berkeley. The stuff that I looked at in my dissertation was lute music of the 17th century, mostly in England, but also elsewhere in Europe, like Italy, Spain. And I looked at how actually it's like what the modern day Rocksmith is doing. It's sort of like, how did people back then learn how to play if they didn't have access to a teacher? So I was looking at instruction books and, beginner sets of music and, looking at how music turned into like the social mobility thing for the people that were learning how to play instruments.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. And today, like I said, we're going to talk about genre. So let's first off, if you would, could you give us a bit of a definition of what we mean when we say genre of music?
So genre, there's no consensus on what genre is. People will use it sort of interchangeably with like style and form and other words like that. That's kind of misleading. Mm-hmm. Most the Wikipedia definition is music grouped by its link to a tradition or a set of conventions, which is, suffice to say, the way I like to say it is a system of classification where we show music's relation, like the relationship of a group of similar music to how we relate to it.
So there's a method of categorizing music, but it's not the only method to categorize music. Obviously, we talk about music by decade, music by century, by era, regional. How much of that can or does interplay with genre?
So that's a really great question, because especially if you look through history, you're going to find music that sounds quite similar that's actually in a different genre. So like if you look at like the Baroque era, you'll hear lots of fugues, lots of counterpoint where the music's kind of going up and down against each other. But some of that is sacred music, and you'd hear it performed in a church. And then some of it is secular music, so you'd hear it just performed for fun in a concert or at someone's house. So even though, we might have like, maybe it's all counterpoint, you'd have like a mass that you'd hear at a church, and then you'd have like a cantata that you hear at, outside of the church. And those two things would have very similar sounding music in them, but they're completely different genres.
Right. So when did the concept of genre sort of first appear to our knowledge?
Ancient Greece.
Okay.
Aristotle lays it out in his Poetics.
Really?
It hasn't actually been, and since music's been written down, people have written stuff about different kinds of music. Like even in like medieval manuscripts, there will be like a paragraph or two about like, and there's this type of song, and then there's that type of song. But I think the genre, the way that we think about it, really started to come to the foreground probably in the 19th century,
Okay.
where music as a field of study sort of moved out of the mathematical, like this is like numbers in motion, part of the quadrivium. So
Yeah.
like if you studied music, in the Middle Ages, like it was part of mathematics.
Gotcha.
But in the 19th century, maybe a little bit of the 18th century, it starts to move into this is more of a humanistic, like feel good emotions kind of thing, more so than a mathematical field of study. And when that happens, people start to think more about their relation to the music and talk about that in an academic field. So like things get codified that way. And that has its pluses and its minuses.
Sure. Right. When we talk about genre appearing in the 19th century, are you saying it was mostly an academic reasoning?
Yeah. So like if you went to conservatory, you would learn about different genres of music, especially if you were going to be a composer. You would study scores. You would read treatises about how to orchestrate things. But for a great example of like how this kind of turns into like it's hard to pin stuff down is like opera, like sung music on stage. Originally, like it was just considered a work. Like opera just means work in Italian, so they would just be like a work by this composer, and it would say opera on the cover. And be like, oh, this is opera.
So does that mean there are things that at one time may have been classified as opera that we would now not recognize as an opera? Like if there was a symphonic piece written in Italy during a certain period?
Yes. You will find things with title pages that classify something as an opera and it's all instrumental music, or it's a book of songs, but it's not a start to finish, like plot driven 2-hour characters on a stage kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, it's
so we have in the 19th century things being sort of categorized academically. When did we start utilizing those distinctions either for entertainment purposes, knowing sort of what type of musical entertainment we identify with most strongly, or as a commodity, being able to say like this store sells country and Western music, this store focuses on rock and roll?
So multiple parts over the years. One thing, if we start in the 19th century, obviously like recorded music wasn't for sale yet, but there were plenty of scores for sale. But what would happen in the concert hall is actually you wouldn't go to see an opera. I mean, you might go to see an opera, but you wouldn't see it the way that we see an opera. Or you might go to see a symphony and you wouldn't experience it start to finish the way that you would if you go to the symphony now. You might hear the first movement of the symphony and then the soloist comes, like the diva comes out and sings an aria from like this hit opera. Then you hear like a solo piece and then it's back to the symphony. So genre hadn't quite crystallized the way that we think of it now, where like it's like, oh, if I go to like the SF Symphony to hear Beethoven 9, that's the main event. I'm going to hear Beethoven 9 from start to finish.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was performed that way, but like oftentimes it would just be like the greatest hits. It would just be like the first movement or like the final movement and then a bunch of other stuff. It was like whoever's here that is available to make this program work.
Especially in a time where like recorded music was either non-existent or rare.
Yeah.
You might just if you just want to hear the hits, you can't buy like the best of like on a wax cylinder maybe just yet. But
yeah, and even then, like the wax cylinders, they only played for like 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So like you're not going to hear the whole thing anyway. There's no way you can fit all that stuff onto like one little cylinder.
So we talked a little bit about you mentioned with opera sort of I guess being more directly defined over time. How often do we see genre titles kind of be applied retroactively to music of the past?
So I think more often than not, it is retroactive. So like, I mean, the thing has to exist before
Right.
you can give it a name, most of the time.
Right.
There are some cases where it kind of goes the opposite direction. And sacred music would be a good example of that, where like you have the mass. And, back in the day when, before microphones and stuff like that, if you were intoning the words of the mass, it makes more sense to sing them because you can project your voice all the way to the back pew. So singing sort of came out of intoning and turned into this whole repertoire that evolved over the centuries. But that was something where like the structure was in place already. Like the mass needs to have these parts,
Right.
and then you add music. But most of the time, it's sort of like, well, we're doing this dance, and it's from France, so let's let's call it a French dance.
So, in modern times, I suppose, like right now, I think we're living in a time where genre is pretty fluid. I think just because of the ability to write, record, perform music is so widely spread. There's so much access to different ideas and different sounds. I imagine for most of history, genre was largely defined, or at least confined, by region.
Yeah, there's a big regional component. I mean, as cosmopolitanism grew and people moved around, like it was sort of like exciting to get music from Italy if you lived in England. And so like you collect these different kinds of dances, and like what evolved out of that was actually something called a dance suite, where you would have different styles of music pulled from different places that all kind of gelled together as dances that people would do at court. So like it wasn't like everything was completely regionally separated, but there were things like people will write about like the different stylistic differences of a dance that comes from Spain as opposed to a dance that comes from France or from Germany. And those things kind of get codified. And even if it's some like Bach writes a dance suite, like he wrote all the music, but the style of each of those dances is still kind of drawn from like the style that came out of that region, if that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah. So are these limitations? Would we want to consider the concept of a genre a limitation or a description of something that exists? I guess it could be applied both ways.
Yeah, I think well, you're speaking to like the pluses and the minuses, right? Like
yeah.
Like genre's really helpful because it helps us to talk about a specific kind of music, and to talk about the features of that kind of music. That's great if you're teaching. That's great if you're, starting a band and you say like, well, I want to be a doom metal band, like, and someone comes in and is like, well, I'm a really great country singer. I'd be like, all right, like this is gonna be weird. Let's try it.
and then it might work, it might not, but
but at least you know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But then the limitations to that are that if you get locked in a genre and you're like, no, we're only a doom metal band, like I will not even consider working with a country singer.
Yeah.
Maybe you miss out on a great opportunity to do something. And then there's like an even more sort of insidious part of like the academic side of genre classification, where, because you're dividing things up, you might be writing things out of a curriculum that actually have quite a bit of value, just in cultural terms, in social justice terms. When you set a canon by genre, it's like these are the things that are important, then it sort of implies that everything else isn't. And that can get really problematic really fast.
And I assume if you're creating a canon for a specific category or genre of music, anything that starts to deviate or push on the confines there was probably dismissed. Is that
right? Well,
does that tend to be the case?
Let's think about it like we're building a music appreciation class over the course of the semester, and we're gonna because universities are universities, that covers from like the beginning of written music to today. You only have 15 weeks to cover everything, so you're going to choose something that probably most typifies different genres along the way. And it's not to say that those pieces aren't good pieces or they aren't good examples, but you're missing out a whole bunch of other stuff that has subtle differences, might be by composers that are frequently written out of history, women, Black composers. Oftentimes, keeping the canon comes at the expense of other music that's going to enrich someone's worldview. So, it can get problematic, but that's not to say that there aren't plenty of people that put together really thoughtful syllabi for those classes that feature those composers. So it can work both ways, but
it depends on who the source is, who the professor is, who the academic is, who's sort of making that list, right?
Yeah.
So what do historians, musicologists, and the entertainment industry sort of stand to gain by distinguishing one type of music from another?
So, I mean, in addition to the benefits of being able to like clearly identify something and talk about it in a lot of cases, like minus all of the murky genre bending gray areas, it can be useful for industry people for marketing. Like if you say, hey, like my band sounds a lot like this other band, if I'm running an online ad campaign, I can market it to other people who might actually enjoy my music.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of being that person that like runs up to everybody and going like, I'm playing a show, come to my show. And everyone's like, I don't even know what kind of music you play. So like that could be a benefit.
Get like a built-in audience.
Yeah.
Sort of.
The con is sort of like, well, we need, back in the days of Barnes and Noble, like we need labels for the shelves and to know where to put the CDs. But that turns into sort of like, one of my pet peeves where it's like all classical music is classical music. And it's like, but that really misrepresents, near 2,000 years of music. And you have like Gregorian chant slotted next to like a 20th century composer that, writes with computers and it's all bleep bloop stuff. And it's like, it's all classical music. And it's like, well, if you go into the store and you're like, I want classical music, you're not necessarily going to get something that makes you happy.
Right.
Because you're not going to get what you came for.
Can contemporary composed pieces, are those actually classical music? Is that classical music? Or does that just depend on kind of who's pitching the idea of that music to you? If it's a record company or an academic?
Yeah, according to most music stores, according to like Billboard charts, like it's all classical music.
Right.
But the same could be said for like jazz or for the blues, where it's like, are we listening to like Delta blues played on acoustic instruments, or are we looking at like Chicago blues where everything's like amplified and it's like Buddy Guy, like shredding it on, a polka dot guitar.
Right.
Like you might get very different, variations within what is considered a genre. And so like, the downside is, there's not as much information as there might be, but then you get like into the weeds with like subgenres.
Which don't tend to appear.
Post and all that.
Yeah, and the infamous posts.
Yeah.
Is that post hardcore? Oh
yeah. Post hardcore. Exactly.
Well, it is 20 after. We're going to take a brief break from the conversation. It's been great so far. If you have any questions in the chat for Marge or myself, please let UB Jurassic know. That is Brian Turner. He is our community manager over in North Carolina. He'll get those questions our way. And at the end of the stream today, we'll take some of your questions about genre, about Rocksmith, about guitar. We'll talk about whatever, really. But we are going to return to the topic of genre in a little while. Right now, however, first, I want to say thank you again to Marge, and we'll see you back very soon. And for everybody in the chat who's live right now, we are going to have our first giveaway of the day. So please listen to UB Jurassic for instructions on how you can win a copy of everything that hopefully you now see on your screen. You're going to get a set of strings from Ball for your guitar. That is a 6-string set. You're also going to receive a 4-string bass guitar set of strings. Both of those are going to be regular Slinky. You're going to get a dozen Everlast picks from Ernie Ball, plus some extra Spectrum Plectrum picks from us here at Rocksmith. You'll receive a black Ernie Ball guitar strap, a variety pack of Ernie Ball Wonder Wipes for your guitar's neck, body, and strings. And you will also receive a peg winder from Ernie Ball. All of that can be yours if you enter and win. We are still waiting to know when we can ship these out. Hopefully, I might be able to send out a batch of them soon. I'll let you know more about that when I find out, though. So please enter, and if you win, you'll get a whisper from UB Jurassic to get your name, your shipping address, and your telephone number. As always, we do need all of that information in order to get your prize to you. So good luck on that, and don't forget, after this raffle, send your questions to UB Jurassic. And if you have any ideas, if you have some examples of maybe your favorite band or song that really sort of pushes the envelope of what their genre would or could be, I'd like to hear them. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit. But right now, I would like to introduce our community guest for today. Performing for us right now is a Twitch streamer for Rocksmith. This is BBQKyle. He is at BBQKyle on Twitch and Twitter. He is at BBQKyle Games. So please check him out. I think he's here in the chat. Yeah, there he is. Hi, BBQKyle. And we will see you back after that.
Hi, everyone. I'm BBQKyle, and Doug has asked me to play a couple songs for you guys today. And the first one I've chosen to play is Only in America by Brooks and Dunn. And the reason that I picked this one is because back when I was a kid, all I would listen to pretty much was country music. And growing up in the 90s, I listened to a lot of Brooks and Dunn. As a matter of fact, two of the first albums I ever owned were Hardworking Man and Borderline. And they actually were part of the inspiration for me to get my first guitar back when I was a kid, which was a little short scale acoustic that I never actually learned how to play. I ended up getting rid of it, but later on when I actually decide to learn how to play guitar, and Rocksmith came out with, I think it was the Independence Day pack. I don't know. If I'm not right on that, I'm sure Doug will correct me. But one of the songs in that pack was the Brooks and Dunn Only in America song. And I was really excited to play a song from a band that originally sparked my interest in playing guitar all those years ago. So here we go. We're going to do this one, Only in America by Brooks and Dunn. All right, there we go. Brooks and Dunn, Only in America. Song from a band that I've pretty much enjoyed all my life. Thank you, guys. I'll be back later.
Hey everyone, it's Brian. Streaming in place here from my house once again. It's been a while since I've been on the stream, so for anybody who's new, I'm a technical audio designer at Ubisoft San Francisco, and I like to build stuff. So Doug asked me a couple of days ago, he said, hey, do you have any new gear that you'd like to show our audience? And I said, not only do I have new to you gear, but I have new to me gear. So I thought about a couple of the things that I've made recently and what I could show people. And the first thing was this. This is a distortion pedal. It looks like a Klon clone, but it's not a Klon clone. But the last time I was on the stream, we talked a bunch about pedals that I'd made recently, so I thought it might be more interesting to talk about something that wasn't a pedal this time. So the other thing that I have is this. This is a guitar that I finished building just about a month ago. So this is a pretty straightforward build, kind of loosely based on a heavily offset double cut junior, set neck, 2 humbuckers, 1 volume, just a toggle switch, no tone control, because we all know you're just going to turn the tone up to 10 and leave it anyway. It's a 25-inch scale, a little longer than a Gibson, a little shorter than a Fender. It's what PRS uses. It's also what Martin used on acoustic guitars. It's kind of a nice in-between. It's got a set neck with a long tenon, similar to what you would see on a Les Paul Jr. or a PRS. The top of the guitar is Afromosia, which is a wood that's tonally similar to maple, but is a little darker in color and has a nice grain pattern to it. The back of the guitar, which we'll talk a little more about in a minute, is actually probably Japanese maple. As you can imagine, a solid maple guitar is fairly heavy, but it sounds good. The neck is a 3-piece laminate. The outer pieces are Babinga. The center stripe is maple. It has a string-through body hipshot hardtail bridge, hipshot locking tuners, a Pau Ferro fingerboard, and a bone nut. In the past, I've usually used tusk nuts, but I wanted to do something a little more traditional for this guitar. And the bone polishes up really nicely and is easy to work with. The color on this guitar is all aniline dye, and then the finish on it is actually shellac. Now, why shellac? You don't usually see shellac on electric guitars. It's something you're more likely to see in high-end classical guitars or French polish on really expensive furniture. So for me, a big part of why I've started using shellac is because it's non-toxic. I used to spray a lot of lacquer, but I don't want to have to deal with the fumes or building a paint booth when shellac is fairly benign, though I would still wear a respirator. So shellac is nice because it's a really thin and flexible finish. It's the reason it gets used on a lot of classical guitars, because those luthiers tend to think that it's the finish that gives the best tone because it's so thin. It's not the easiest thing to work with. There's definitely a learning curve, but the results are really nice. And it's easy to touch up if ever the guitar has an accident at some point in its life. It's got a nice feel on the back of the neck. It's not sticky like a lot of the thick poly finishes are. So, the electronics. The 2 humbuckers in this guitar are ones that I built. I've been building all my own pickups for the better part of a decade now. And to be honest, these are ones that I just had sitting in a box, so they went in this guitar. But they work well with the bright nature of this build and its woods. They're both fairly hot PAF style pickups, wound with plain enamel wire and using Alnico magnets. One thing that's absent from this guitar, and this is kind of a dig at Dan because he loves straps so much, is there's no strap buttons. So there's no strap on the guitar. So I guess for me, the most interesting thing about this guitar is kind of the story of how it came to be. As I said, the body of this guitar is probably Japanese maple, and you're probably wondering, how is it probably Japanese maple? Why don't you know what it is? So the wood that this body was made out of kind of has a story, and that's what makes this guitar important to me. When my grandfather passed away, and this was years and years ago now, I went to help clean out his stuff, and tucked away in the corner of the garage was this big plank of wood, like dark chocolate brown, just stamped to Japan on it. It looked like something that was probably used on a cargo ship to shore up the containers. So I dragged it home with me, and I said, I'm going to build a guitar out of that. And I didn't necessarily have all the skills or knowledge to do it, but I had the desire. And I dragged that piece of wood through 5 different houses with me, sitting in the corner of one garage or the corner of a shed, before I finally got around to starting to build the guitar. I actually dragged it to a 6th house once I'd started it but hadn't finished it yet. So for me, this build is this culmination of 15 years of saying, I'm going to make a guitar out of that. I'm going to make a guitar out of that. Someday, I'm going to make a guitar out of that. And there were many projects in between, but hey, I made a guitar out of it, and it turned out pretty good. So if you like hearing about the various projects that I have, you can check out my social medias, which I think Doug and Brian will post somewhere. Maybe here, maybe here, maybe in the chat. And you can also bother them and tell them that you would like to see more of this, because there's always something cooking on the bench. There's a few more guitar builds. There's always some pedals in the works. We can talk about distortions another time soon, maybe. But yeah, thanks to Doug for inviting me on the show, and have a great week, everyone. Thanks.
I'm muted. There may be an issue. Was I muted the whole time? I may have been muted that entire time. If I was muted, we'll say thank you very much to Ryan Pody for the beautiful guitar, the beautiful video, and the beautiful story. You can find him at Pody Guitars on Twitter and Instagram. That's POEDY Guitars. And since BBQKyle a little bit of country, we're also going to give away some country right now. And we're going to give away 5 copies of the Brad Paisley song pack. That song pack came out 1 or 2 Januaries ago. It seems, I don't know, time's funny, but in that song pack is going to have Mud on the Tires, Ticks, and Brad Paisley featuring Alison Krauss with Whiskey Lullaby. So if you enter, look for UB Jurassic's instructions in the chat, and you can win 1 of 5 copies of that song pack on Steam. So good luck there. And right now we're going to take one more look at BBQKyle with something a little bit more rock and roll. We'll be back after that with Dr. Margaret Jones.
Hi everyone, it's me again, and this time there's absolutely no story behind the song I picked. It's just one I like to play, Outshined by Soundgarden. Shine by Soundgarden. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to play for you today. If you enjoyed what you saw, follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/BBQKyle. And thank you guys once again. Till next time, take it easy.
And thank you once again to BBQKyle for sending us that stream, for sending us those performances. He streams pretty often, especially I think now he has a new streaming PC. Once more, you can find him on Twitch at BBQKyle, and he's there in the chat. I'm sure he can help you find your way to his stream. Joining me again, I have Dr. Margaret Jones. Hello, Marge. Welcome
Hello.
back to the stream. Hopefully we have audio right now. Let me unmute the stream for just a moment so I can hear my own echo. There we are. We have audio. We're back on. Sorry about that again, everyone. A little bit of confusion, as you might notice. Certain somebody is streaming right now. That certain someone is on vacation. We have David Stevens back on the board, helping us run the board behind the scenes. So thank you very much to him. And let's talk some more about genre. We have questions that I'm looking for. I have too many tabs right now. So talking about genre, categorization, how it's defined. Our current understanding, how much of our current understanding of genre, and this may be different again depending on who's talking about genre, whether it's academic, whether it's consumer, whether it's just you and your friends talking about what genres you like. How is genre shaped by how we consume music?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it probably depends a lot. Like, this is cyclical, and I know it's cyclical, but it probably depends on what genre we're talking about, too.
Sure.
Like if we're talking about punk, like there's a community that forms around bands that is very close-knit, and, the scenes are very, like, close-knit and overlapping with each other, more so than maybe some other more like soloist-driven genres might be. So like I would expect like a hardcore fan of punk music to engage with like consuming music really differently than like someone who likes violin sonatas.
Sure.
But like I think within that there's the 20th century especially, and like music reproduction has really driven a change in like how we think about genre. And part of that is like the Barnes and Noble thing, where it's like, here's classical, here's rock.
Now, do you think that has caused overall over the past 100 years, let's say 120 years maybe, do you think that sort of overt categorization of music has led to more diversity within genre, or do you think it has kept certain artists locked into specific sounds that otherwise may have tried different sounds over the course of their careers?
I think it's changing, like even as we speak. I think it has forced some like less conventional acts, especially back in like the 60s with like payola stuff with radio stations. Like it did keep people really locked into sound because you had to have a label backing you, paying lots of money to a radio station to even get you out there so people knew that you existed. And that kept a lot of people underground for a long time. But then, like at the end of the 60s into the 70s, as Summer of Love happened and like things got more DIY. The more DIY it got, the more people could experiment a little bit more. And like especially with like punk, where like everybody was doing their own thing, like writing and publishing their own zines, even if they weren't releasing albums, or like once tape players were a thing and you could get a tape duplicator and like just sell tapes at your shows without having to have a record deal like
behind you,
paying for everything. I think that's probably where things start to kind of break apart a bit, and get more individualized. But really, like, since music started circulating on the internet, then it's kind of like anybody's oyster.
Right.
Like
And I guess,
you can listen to your friends' bands, or you could listen to like the stuff. Record labels are still promoting huge artists, but you're more likely to maybe run into both of those things.
yeah.
And get recommendations. And now when we have music streaming services, as much as we all gripe about the cost per, or the payout per stream as musicians, like one of the benefits is that there's also an algorithm that can work for you by putting your music in front of people's ears that would never have known about you.
Right. No, that we talked a little bit in the downtime, and I think that's a good time to bring up when an algorithm decides what your genre is. So, because that's a reality right now, where you might make music, and depending on what the people who listen to music are also listening to, might get you pulled into certain categorizations. So what is the effect of that on the artist, and how can an artist utilize that or fight against it if, say, they're being categorized as something that they don't feel their music espouses or belongs with?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain point, like, I would never complain if I just get pleasantly surprised by, a bunch of fans that I would never have thought, listen to music that sounds like me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been surprised. I've been told I sound like people that like I never thought of. The strangest, like the band I play in is pretty straight ahead, like sort of PJ Harvey, Nick Cave styled rock.
Yeah.
But I was told I sound like the lady from Evanescence, and it's like, okay, I'm not gonna fight it if that's what you hear. So that was also just like one guy at a bar, but if I get sent in a direction where like people like my music that I didn't expect to like my music, I think that's not a bad thing. That said, like, if you feel like you're being miscategorized in a way that's like costing you listeners, like, I mean,
Right.
I guess there's metadata that you can add to, like, I think a lot of times, like, the recommendations that I see on streaming services say something like, oh, well, you like this band? Well, here's something that the bass player from this band also works on. So it's sort of like this, building this network out of individual musicians. So if you have all of your metadata in place of like who all performed on this track and that kind of stuff, like it seems like it's pulling from that to make recommendations. So like, it's kind of like also like have you put yourself out there in a way that like lets the algorithm understand who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were talking about how genre shaped how we consume music. To flip that, how does genre shape how we consume music? Just turn it around. Because I know, like, and we're talking about trying to get out of genres that you might not want to be attached to. Because you might not listen to music that says it's in a. I'm not going to name any right now. I'm sure everybody can think of some music that they just choose. If it says it's this kind of music, I'm not going to listen to it because I know I'm not going to like it. How else might genre shape how we consume and digest music?
I think it probably, especially, my reference point was like back in the days of CD stores. I mean, I certainly stream everything now, but, when I went into a CD store, I would walk specifically to the section that I wanted to get music from.
Yeah.
And, that definitely meant that, even if I browsed all of my favorite sections, like there were sections that I never went to.
And so that's just music that is totally right. And whereas I guess now with algorithms on streaming services, it might not necessarily be suggesting music based on genre. They might be suggesting music based on lyrical content or the texture or the arrangement, the type of instrumentation that it has. Or just, again, based on who else is listening to it. And if they're listening to the same thing as you are, it's going to say, hey, you're probably going to like this too, because people who like what you like also like this, whatever kind of music it is. How far do you think we are from a sort of post-genre era? Because I think you mentioned that might also be cyclical, where the adherence to genre is more or less depending on the time that you're in.
Yeah, and I think there are also genres that encourage genre breaking more so than others, where like there's like a lot of like chamber pop music where you're going to hear like a bunch of like really talented jazz musicians sitting in a session musicians, and like it's basically a jazz record but with like pop lyrics,
Right.
or something like that. I don't think we're ever going to be completely outside genre, just because that's, you know, a way people can easily talk about their musical tastes.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see the lines blurring a lot more as things open up. That would be my prediction. Like, I think, and it's not like that wasn't happening before, but it just seems like the opportunities are there because, you know, you don't have to do the same kind of like hard push advertising campaign for indie stuff that like the big labels do, where you have to just understand what this person's about.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is a pop act, okay? And then like 5 albums in, you get to do your introspective chamber folk thing.
Right. There's one for the label, one for yourself, one for the label. That brings me to one of the questions from the chat right now. Actually from BBQKyle, our community guest today. He asked way earlier, does that mean pop is not a genre necessarily, just a measure of if a piece of music is popular enough to gain that designation? Because that is an interesting distinction about the genre of pop music.
Well, and then that also comes down to like where we kind of started, where it was, you know, are we talking about the purpose of the music, or are we talking about the aesthetic of the music?
Right.
And
right.
You know, I think these days genre is a combination of both. Like in the past, like academically, historically, it would be the function first and foremost. Like, do we sing it in church? Do we sing it at parties? Like, you can't do one at the other. It doesn't work.
Right.
Except they did. But they said they would.
They swap out the lyrics.
But yeah, these days, like, I mean, there are departments of popular music studies which definitely talk about all kinds of music that like achieves a certain amount of popularity, especially in like US culture. But also globally. But on the other hand, you know, there's, you know, when you say pop music, like certain aesthetics come to mind. These days would be like a touch of auto-tune on the voice to smooth everything out, or just like bright synth aesthetics, or like the drums sound a certain way. So there are probably danceable, or like luscious ballad.
So yeah, if you make a pop record, you make a pop album, it has sort of all the hallmarks of what we and I'm going to use myself as an example because it's easy for me, from pop music taken from contemporary United States sensibilities, and nobody buys that album, nobody listens to that album. Is it a pop album? It's not popular, obviously. So like you're adhering to the hallmarks of a style of music that is itself an indicator of the popularity of the music. So what is it? What is the genre of that music? Or does it matter if nobody's listening to it? If an album falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, is it pop music? I don't think I left you a way to answer that question. I'm so sorry.
I mean, it definitely has the pop aesthetic. You know, let's ask Billboard.
Sure.
Does Billboard still? Billboard? Yeah, it's still. Yeah.
We're still starting stuff. Yeah,
still starting stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, let's see. What did we actually? Let me go back to the question that BBQKyle asked. I sort of deviated from that. So yeah, does that mean pop is not a genre necessarily, just a measure of if a piece of music is popular enough to gain that designation? So if we can narrow down the answer without me butting in, what would be your response to that?
As a genre, I would say no, even though that goes against the academic definition. Just because I think culturally now, like we all accept that pop means a certain thing, in terms of style and popularity. But there are also times where, you know, the Hot 100 has, like hip hop, R&B at the top of the charts in like the number 1, number 2 spots, and like that's popular music. Is it pop?
Right. It could be, in the past, I say, R&B has definitely sort of been at the top of the charts. It might be right now. I'm not actually sure what the charts read right now, but I feel like R&B is probably still up there.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit behind hip hop. I'm not sure.
Like functionally, it's popular, but
right.
Pop means something different to most people. So I think just from a societal, like communal standpoint, like it means it means something to everybody that's different than that. So like I might make an exception from the academic rule to say that context also matters.
Context does matter. We have a few more questions if you've got the time.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I want to go back to the original conversation. Briefly, if we can talk about sort of how genre evolves or genres merge or fade over time. What seems to be the biggest reason for genre shift?
I mean, that's kind of where I was coming from when I was saying, like, it's also measuring our relationship to music, where, any way that we talk about music, whether we're talking about music theory, whether we're talking about music history, if we're talking about like historically informed performance practices where like everything has to be a medieval instrument, like whatever we're talking about, it's like, what do we value in the here and now that's making us make those choices? So to a certain extent, genre is fixed by function and, style and taste, but also, how present is it in lots of people's minds? Like how much does everybody in the here and now care about it? And like one example I could think of was like back in the late 90s when like Gregorian chant was really big again all of a sudden.
Right. Yeah.
like they discovered some, or like they finally like cracked the code on some manuscripts or something, and like there was a version that like people could do, and then it was an Anonymous 5, I think.
I can see the album cover,
which is also the name of one of the scribes from like the Middle Ages. I think that's where they got the name from.
Okay.
But yeah, and then they were like doing like all of these like Gregorian chants with like synthesizers behind them and stuff. So like that's not the way it was performed when it was there. It's not the original function for it, and it's not the original instrumentation, but we still think of it as Gregorian chant.
And so I guess you could think of more contemporary styles of music, like when swing returned, also in the 90s. It had rockabilly sort of. Rockabilly has come and gone, and it tends to borrow from a very specific starting point and always returns to that pool while also maintaining the growth over the years when it has sort of come back in to popular notice.
And there's always like a kind of like engagement with nostalgia that kind of comes with it too, where it's like, do you want to feel nostalgic about this time that originally like very few of us were alive to witness? But...
And in the case of Gregorian chant,
none of us. And like we can't. They've all been dead for the better part of 2 millennia. We can't go ask them what it was like.
Right, and we can really only infer what it sounded like when it was
And so then it moves into like this sort of like new age, like space where it's like, oh, it's the distant past, and I'm going to feel something far away.
Sure.
If there are any fans of Anonymous 5 in the chat, I am not trying to make fun of them. I just very much appreciate the very like unique aesthetic that came out of that singular moment in time.
It was a weird thing to happen, having Gregorian chant all of a sudden like hear it on the radio, on like rock stations and in the backgrounds of the popular music of the day. It was a strange thing. I think unique to that time, at least with Gregorian chant. I'm sure there are other musical concepts that have been pulled from history and placed in contemporary music. I just can't think of any right this moment. You might be able to.
There's the guy that does the Viennese waltzes, and everybody wears the puffy sleeve dresses. Andre Rieu.
Okay, I'm not sure.
He's a violinist, but then he has like this whole like orchestra of people that are sort of in period dress but not,
Okay.
and they just play Viennese waltzes. He's just like the king of waltz. And like the Viennese waltz, I mean, like in Vienna, they played, Blue Danube at the end of just about everything.
Yeah.
But that's pretty regional still. But like there's, enough fans of Viennese waltzes around the world that like that's his career.
Right.
So.
I guess
I can think of like all of like the one-off like strange things, but like.
I mean, that's the thing. If you figure out that one-off strange thing and it has some traction behind it, like that can just be, you can just do that if you want to. You can be the I can't, my words are failing.
The Viennese
Please help
Waltz
me.
King.
Viennese Waltz King. You can be the Viennese Waltz King if you're the only person like really like focusing on that style of music and bringing it into today. One more thing I wanted to ask you about genre before we depart. Music that intentionally defies genre conventions. 1, why would you do that? 2, why wouldn't you do that? 3, what would be the purpose of intentionally bucking genre convention?
I mean, it can make you hear a song in a completely different way. Like the most obvious example I could think of would be like a cross-genre cover.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe like Johnny Cash singing "Hurt."
Right. Taking a sort of industrial ballad and turning it into
like this deeply introspective country song.
Yeah.
It's like one of those songs where like I didn't listen to a lot of country, and then I did because I heard that song.
Yeah.
And that's another that goes to like the sort of like where genre can really not be that great. It was like I just don't listen to country, and like but if you like Johnny Cash, if you like the Avett Brothers, if you like the like I don't know, if you like the Black Keys, like there's some element of country that you like.
Yeah, right. You might not realize it at the time because you don't listen to country, so you don't have the vocabulary about country to know what you do or don't like about it. Interesting.
Yeah. So it can kind of pull you in a direction where you discover you like a different genre because the songwriting, there's similarities in the songwriting structure, and it lends itself to two things. One time I would say you shouldn't do it would be if it's like appropriating something that has like deep cultural significance and you're just putting it into a genre that doesn't make any sense for it.
Sure.
I think you could get into some hot water there where you might actually, offend some people. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good look ever.
Right. I think I had one or two more questions from the chat. Let me head over there. Actually, a comment from CJ Blanford, who's on the stream a bit ago. We asked about artists who push the boundaries of their genre, and CJ Blanford brought up Opeth. Opeth pushed what it meant to be a death metal band and weren't afraid to bring other influences into the mix. Same with Pain of Salvation. They mix a ton of genres, sometimes to the chagrin of their fans who only want them to make one style of music. How, as an artist, how beholden are you to the genre that your fans identify you with?
Ooh, I would say that you're not, as long as you're not just like trolling people for the sake of trolling them.
Sure.
Like, I mean, you can't give up your artistic integrity and like just completely tailor a project that is just to be a crowd pleaser. That's when you have a flop record, because most of the time you can kind of hear it. That you're like, oh, we're just gonna make the same album that they liked, but do it again.
Right. I guess every now and then you might have a band who like their freshman album is one genre, then they try to break out of that, and everybody says boo, no, and then third album they're back to that first genre. I don't know if that's ever happened, but I feel like it might have. And they should be proud of their change. They should accept and adapt and be the artist they want to be.
Maybe you get to have like the sonic songwriting break
Sure.
from your first style, where you explore something else and you're like, all right, I got it out of my system. Let's get back
Yeah.
to basics and like
Right.
just make a solid album that's like the thing we do really well. But then you have that distance from like the first album to the third album where you actually have some more songs that work in that genre and might be stronger because some of those influences that you brought in on album number 2 are still there, but they're just kind of buried a little more. So it sounds more like you and less like, like now I'm making an album in this genre.
and then you've got Ween, who I'm pretty sure every song is a study of a particular genre. And then you've got 12 golden country classics, which is just 12 different styles of country music, one per song.
Is that the one that it's like help me scrape the mucus from my eyes or something? Like I think that one of those
is that
a song like
one of the 12 golden country
or off my brain, not off my eyes, off my brain. Help me scrape the mucus off my brain.
Maybe. So I'm sure the chat will let us know.
Like I can't believe you didn't know that.
All right. Well, Marge, thank you so much for being here with us today. It is unfortunately time to wrap up. It was great having you. And hopefully we will see you again soon. Before I let you go, you have been working on something recently.
Oh yes, I have. I have a band too, and we are in the middle of our COVID album. Navigating the many challenges.
Is that going to be a genre of its own, COVID albums?
I'm worried that like everyone's going to have a COVID sessions album that's like completely self-produced and probably not all that good.
Right.
We're lucky that our bass player is actually like a budding audio engineer, so we have that covered. Like we can actually track drums and bass so they sound like they should. And that's basically as far as we are right now. We've tracked a lot of drums and bass, but we're going to get into guitar land in the next week or two, so I'm very excited about that.
Cool. Well, good luck. Any
the band is M. Jones and the Melee, if anyone.
M. Jones and the Melee.
Anyone wants to become a fan.
Melee.
Yes.
Yeah. And what genre is it?
Oh, geez.
Might as well ask.
It's we call it fight jazz.
Fight jazz. That sounds fun. That sounds really fun.
It's a rock band. We make rock music.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, again, thank you very much, Marge. We have one final giveaway for today's stream. So if you are in the chat live, please look for UB Jurassic's instructions on how you can win everything that you see on your screen now. You're going to get 2 sets of strings from Running Ball, one for your 6-string guitar, one for a 4-string bass. You're going to get a dozen picks from Running Ball, plus some picks from us here at Rocksmith. You'll also receive a package of Wonder Wipes from Running Ball to keep your guitar's strings, body, and neck fresh and polished and lasting longer. You're also going to get a peg winder from Running Ball and a guitar strap to keep your guitar firmly affixed to your person. So good luck on that. And once more, we will need your name, your shipping address, and your telephone number if you win. Brian Turner, that's UB Jurassic, will reach out to you if you're the winner to get that information from you. And then these will all be shipped out once I can return to the studio to do so. Don't know when that'll be. We're holding on to the information. I think we've had one person let us know that their address has changed since we started doing these at-home streams. If that is the case for you as well, if you've moved, if your address has changed, your phone number's changed, and you're a winner, let us know so we can go back and update information so that we don't ship it to your old home, because that would be really sad. But really like a nice treat for whoever lives there now, I suppose. But that's probably not who we're talking to. Good luck on those streams. We will be back next week. I think there's a special event going on right now. They might have some information in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Brian Pody for again that beautiful guitar, that beautiful story, and thank you to BBQKyle for playing a couple songs for us, letting us in. You can follow him on Twitch at BBQKyle. You can also follow Brian Pody on Instagram and Twitter at Pody Guitars. That's Poedy. Marge, if you're still on the line, where can we find your music?
You can find us at mjonesandthemelee.com. We have a website.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you all next week. Goodbye.